Welcome back to the Sustainable Design Lab podcast. I'm Brodie, Vander, Dussen.
And I'm Chris Bradley.
And if you worked in packaging over the last few years, you've probably heard the same request over and over. Can we add recycled content? It sounds straightforward until you realize that one simple question opens the door to dozens and dozens of others.
And does PCR always mean a lower environmental impact? What happens when regulations require recycled content? And how do you balance sustainability, performance, availability, and cost when all of those priorities seem to be competing with one another?
So today we're digging into those questions with somebody who's been helping brands navigate them every day. Jay Bolus is Vice President of Sustainability at IPG, and he has spent years working at the intersection of material science, circularity, and packaging regulations.
And we're going to talk a little bit about regulations, how they're changing the future of packaging, where recycled content creates real value and where it doesn't, and how companies can really avoid reducing sustainability to a single metric. All right, Jay, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on. I know that you've been in sustainability for quite a while now from some of our conversations in the past. And so we just wanted to start out with some perspective from you about how sustainability has really changed over the last decade. When you look at the industry today, what feels fundamentally different than maybe it did 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, well, great question. And thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting with you guys. One of the things that strikes me is customer/consumer expectations have definitely changed and grown, I would say, with respect to sustainability. I think there's like this new generation of consumers. I've got 2 daughters that are in their early to mid 20s, right? And 10 years ago, they were teenagers, but now they're, quote unquote adults. And, they're out there in the world making purchasing decisions. And a lot of what goes into that is sustainability attributes of products, right? They're sort of expecting more from manufacturers when it comes to sustainability, particularly in the area of packaging. They're really sensitive to, packaging, how much packaging is used, what kind of packaging, is it recyclable? They order tons of stuff online and they don't want to get, this huge mess of stuff that they then have to find a home for. They just want their products. So that's been a big change for me. And I also think the regulatory landscape, which I know we'll dive into a bit later, but that's really evolved in the last 10 years too. And I think it's driving some unintended consequences and maybe some behaviors that aren't totally aligned with true sustainability. But, again, I think we'll probably dive into that a bit later.
Definitely. I actually want to pick up on that string just now. Before we started recording, we talked a little bit about the alphabet soup / elephant in the room. It feels like in every conversation are these regulations and how, they're really emerging and evolving rapidly around the world, not just here in the US, but, everywhere. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, how are regulations like SB 54, particularly EPR in the States and PPWR in Europe, how are they changing the priorities for packaging teams?
We could probably spend an entire hour talking about regulation, but nobody wants that, me included. So it's interesting. I sort of, I put companies in one of 3, camps, buckets, whatever, right? The first bucket is the ones that are sort of comfortably numb, like they don't even know this exists. And it's shocking how many of them are out there, right? I just saw a stat where I think like 2,500 producers have registered in the state of California. I know there's a lot more than that. So a bunch of them obviously aren't registering either because they don't know about it or because they're just choosing not to. The second bucket are those who are, sort of going along kicking and screaming and doing the absolute bare minimum they have to do to sort of comply with the regulations. And then the third bucket are the ones who look at this as a potential opportunity, for innovation and drive growth and drive sales. So, proactively looking at, hey, what are these regulations asking for? Not just today, but 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. Particularly when you look at PPWR in Europe, where they've got requirements around recycled content, recyclability, that don't kick in for another handful of years. So some companies are actually saying, hey, that's an opportunity for us. If we can meet these requirements early, maybe there's an opportunity to get business away from our competitors who maybe are in that, first or second bucket going forward. So
that actually brings up, I guess, my next question, which one of the things that our customers are constantly asking us about is recycled content. So we're being asked to provide details about this, our averages, et cetera. But PCR is sometimes being treated as a destination rather than one tool in a much larger sustainability strategy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think we all know sustainability is pretty complex, right? There's not a one size fits all solution and it's not single attribute. However, that said, I think there's a sort of a desire from the customer/consumer standpoint to try and make it a one issue kind of thing. And so right now it's PCR, right? And maybe earlier it was renewable materials or whatever, or plastic alternatives, but PCR seems to be the focus, and that seems to be the surrogate for quote unquote sustainable packaging. And I think it's dangerous because you put your blinders on and you say, oh, it's got to have PCR, it's got to have more PCR, the better. And we know that's not true. There's a lot of product applications, particularly on the film side. It's really challenging to use PCR. You're going to see a drop in performance, or you're going to see an increase in cost. Or maybe you have to make the film thicker just to incorporate some PCR. So at the end of the day, you're using more material than you were without. So it's like, is this really more sustainable or not? So yeah, it's one tool in the toolbox. Absolutely. It's not the end all be all. We try to think about, hey, we're going to maximize the use of PCR wherever it makes sense, but we're not going to force it into applications where it certainly doesn't make sense.
I love what you said about how there isn't like one sustainability attribute there isn't one. There's so many and there's so many different factors. And depending on the application, you're looking at so many different things. How do you approach decisions when improving like one metric, like you're saying, recycled content, even carbon footprint, but that might negatively impact the other? Performance is something that we never compromise on, but like recyclability, cost, there's so many different other things. How do you balance those trade-offs?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we've done, we sort of have what we call the innovation triangle, right? And it's cost, performance, and sustainability. And, as we're innovating new products, ideally you want to improve in all three, but that's, we call that a unicorn, because there aren't any of those around. If you happen to see one, let me know. But it's really about, if you can improve on one, but you sacrifice one of the other two, that's only going to be a niche product, right? That's not going to go mainstream. And maybe that's okay. Maybe there's a place for niche products out there. But from our perspective, we want to improve one of those and keep the other two the same. And that's really challenging. So we have to get creative in the way that we talk about cost. It's total cost of ownership now. It's not just pound for pound. Hey, is this tape with PCR more expensive than one without? Maybe so. But again, look at the total cost of ownership. Is this going to help you with your EPR fees? Is this going to help you with your corporate sustainability goals? Like, what other things can we talk about that sort of increase the value proposition? So then the cost becomes, neutral, or maybe even, a little bit on the positive side. But our R&D guys love me because I always say it depends. When they ask me a question about, hey, is this material more sustainable than this one, right? Well, it depends. I mean, sustainability is not black and white. There's bazillion shades of gray. Maybe not 50, but certainly a bunch of shades of gray. And we have to understand that it's not one size fits all. And a sustainable material is very contextual. And it's not going to be more sustainable in every single application you can think of.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because we often focus on what a package is made from, but not necessarily how it's packaged. So one of those components that we're always looking at is automation, because you also have the human element and the time and a whole host of other things. So where do you think automation fits this sustainability conversation? And do you think it's one of the industry's most overlooked opportunities?
Yeah, I would agree. It is an overlooked opportunity. And it fits into the efficiency side of the equation, right? So you're able to potentially use less material, use material more effectively, and do things in a way that, again, makes your entire packaging and shipping process more efficient, which will reduce your energy consumption potentially, or certainly energy per package or per product packaged will go down with really effective automation. So it definitely plays a role. But again, I think it's on the efficiency side. We talk about efficiency and effectiveness. Right? If being effective is doing the right thing and being efficient is doing it the right way. So we want to make sure we're being effective first, and then we'll work on the efficiency side of things, which is where automation can fit in.
As I've been thinking about, and we've chatted often about the SP54 and all the regulations and some of these, pathways for individual source reduction plans and so on. One thing that I think is we find commonly is the material switch of switching out of plastic into a different kind of material. I think that that's an easy one. I think lightweighting, there's a lot of pathways that I think come easier than others. I'm curious from your perspective and your experience, can you share an example where improving the packaging process, maybe not using like a material change or material switch pathway, but resulted in a meaningful, sustainability improvement?
Yeah, I think, if we go back to automation and, we sort of think about, we've got some pretty cool tape heads that we've designed that allow you to use a thinner tape, use less material, but still get the same quality seal in the box that you're looking for. So, this idea of down gauging or using less to perform the same function, I think automation plays a huge role there. I think on the stretch film side, I saw a report, I can't remember what conference I was at, but the vast majority of manufacturers don't have the right settings on their pallet wrappers. So as a result, they're using a ton more material than they need to. So take the time, bring some service techs in, make sure you got the thing working at its peak performance, because stretch film's designed to stretch, 200-300 times. And if you don't have the right settings on your wrappers, you're not going to get that benefit, and you're going to use a lot more material than you need to.
Yeah, I think the good old cut and weigh is kind of in the toolbox for a long time, and it's still one of the very best for kind of reducing material and getting some sustainability benefits. Speaking a little bit about innovation, because that's an area that, of course, I'm very, very interested in at the lab. We're always looking for what's new and what's coming. What sustainability innovations are you seeing gain the most momentum right now? And are there any that you think maybe are being overlooked?
Yeah, well, I'm seeing a lot of really interesting innovations on the material side, particularly in the biopolymer, bioplastics realm. And I think that's being driven by regulation, but I think it's also being driven by consumer awareness and the microplastics issue. And, plastics are bad. That seems to be kind of the general perspective out there. So a lot of these biopolymers, that are able to be marine degradable or biodegradable or compostable, potentially, are going to get you out of the microplastic concern. A lot of these things are like, hey, it's made out of algae, or it's made out of crab shells, or it's made out of, some innovative material that maybe isn't scalable today. But I think you have enough of these things out there where one or two of them are going to hit and become, successful at large scale. So material innovation, absolutely. I think automation is still a place that's ripe for improvement.
Absolutely. I'm excited for the day where those two can convene, where you've got this material innovation on this like biomaterial. Seaweed, of course, we're stoked about, how to integrate that into automated processes to kind of keep that efficiency and effective, balance that you were talking about.
And get economies of scale, because the problem is these things are so expensive right now, right? Because they're doing them at lab scale or small scale batch productions, and it's just not competitive. So again, these are sort of niche products as we think about, well, sustainability is better, but cost just went up. And performance, that's sort of still being debated whether performance is the same or worse. So if we go back to that innovation triangle, we're stuck with a niche product unless we can keep cost performance the same while we increase sustainability.
Absolutely. And I think that even reminds me of a lot of what we're planning to showcase in our innovation experience coming up in August with IPG that we're really excited about. We've got some really cool samples of some of the new biomaterials, biopolymers and emerging materials, as well as a lot of what IPG is doing as far as automation and some of your guys' samples that I'm stoked to showcase and bring out into the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So
Yeah, awesome. We're excited to be a partner with you guys in that. So really looking forward to it.
it's gonna be great. I'm stoked. Atlanta in August, though, for the Southern California girl is a little worried about me,
Yes,
but it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great.
it'll be a little toasty, but that's okay.
I want to hear your perspective too. And, you've had so much opportunity working across manufacturers and customers and, the broader packaging value chain. Where do you think the industry still gets it wrong when it comes to sustainable packaging?
I'm going to go back to, something I said earlier about sort of the one size fits all, or like the black and white solutions. I think that's a problem. There's not a lot of flexibility for manufacturers, but also, on the customer/consumer side. I think understanding that, there isn't going to be a silver bullet, and there isn't going to be the one thing that now all of a sudden, we're going to use this material and now all packaging magically becomes sustainable. There's a lot of aspects to it that really still need to be optimized. So to me, that's the biggest sort of miss I see in this.
One thing that I wanted to chat about is, I think IPG has a really cool history I know we first bonded over cradle to cradle and some of the things that you guys were involved there. And I know, you've been involved in developing more sustainable products and solutions. So looking back over your time, what lessons have those projects taught you that apply across the entire packaging industry?
Well, that's a great question. I think sometimes we get caught up with focusing on, hey, what are our customers asking us for? And they don't know. I mean, you think about, the cell phone and the laptop and all these great innovations that nobody was asking for, but, somebody said, hey, this actually could potentially fill a really important need. And I think as we're developing these innovative solutions, we have to think about, like, where does this make sense? Where would this be a more sustainable solution to what's currently out there, even if the customers aren't asking for it? Because I think if we present it and we present it in the right way, there's going to be an aha moment where they're like, or, call it the holy shit moment, whatever you want, where they're like, oh my gosh, this really is a more sustainable solution. I didn't know I needed it, but now I can't live without it, sort of thing, right? So that's what I'm trying to work with our R&D guys about, is kind of get out of the mindset of, well, let's just ask consumers, what our customers, what they're looking for and what they're missing, and we'll fill that void. No, let's flip it around and say, let's present something to them that they don't know they need yet. But once they understand it and realize the benefits, they won't be able to live without it.
Hallelujah. Because, I think you just kind of gave the business case for the Sustainable Design Lab. We're constantly looking at what's available out there and how we can present that to our customers to give them some options that maybe they didn't know existed. So
when you're looking at, we talked a little bit about where the industry has been, kind of what's going on right now. When you look ahead 5 to 10 years, what do you think is going to have the biggest impact on sustainable packaging?
Something we haven't touched on yet, but as part of these regulations and maybe deserves a few minutes, is sort of the reuse refill opportunities. I mean, when I think, I put my IPG hat on, being selfish here, I don't think our products necessarily lend themselves well to that reuse refill model, but a lot of packaging in the US certainly does. And, we're way behind. Like, Europe is way ahead of us on the whole reuse refill side of the equation. So I think going forward, we're going to start to see more in the reuse refill side of things. I think legislation is going to drive it, for one, but I think it's probably the right thing to do. And there's lots of potential applications for that. And then I think, going forward, we're going to see huge innovations on just material side of things. We're going to see, even in the plastic space, there's going to be innovation with existing polymers. When we talk about, multi-layer packaging being made with the same material now, so that's actually recyclable, is, a big innovation. I think that still is, got some work or some place to grow. And then new materials, definitely, like we talked about the biopolymers and the bioplastics. I think in the next handful of years, we're going to see a lot more of those, and hopefully they'll be at scale, so they'll be cost competitive.
So if you look at our audience, the people that listen to the show, they're usually packaging engineers or somebody who's really responsible for packaging within their company. So for those of them listening, what would you recommend that they could do one thing differently tomorrow? What would you encourage them to focus on?
I think, I would say, look, take a step back and look at your packaging holistically. Understand what you're using, where you're using it, and is it really necessary? Right? Because a lot of things, we've sort of packaged a certain way, and we've done that for a while, and we've sort of always done it that way, so we continue to do it that way. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to just eliminate packaging altogether. Like, do we really need it? Do we really need to shrink wrap, these rolls of tape? Or do we need to put things in a bag when, we could just put them in a box by themselves, or whatever? Sort of take a step back and say, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And see if there's opportunities to eliminate some stuff that you're currently using or doing.
We end every episode on the same question, because we want to end, looking towards the future. What's something that, when we think about the future of packaging, what is one thing that gives you, Bolus, hope?
Wow. Just one thing? There are a lot of things out there, but no, honestly, you know what? It's the fact that we've got, people like you guys who are really involved in this and care about this. We've got a new generation of consumers like my daughters who are putting a priority on this. The old guard's sort of moving out and the new guard's coming in and they value this stuff. And there's a lot of people doing a lot of really good work and working really hard on this. So that gives me hope.
I love that. I thank you for that. I think that it's encouraging to me to be in the room with people like you. And, as we're all moving forward, in our own areas, in our own lanes, trying to make this, a little bit scalable, a little bit more applicable, relevant.
I'll quote my colleague, Bill McDonough, like, it's going to take all of us and it's going to take forever, but that's the point.
Yep. And the future is sustainable. So let's do it. Well, that's a good way to end it. Thank you so much, Jay. Appreciate you coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, guys.
One thing that really stood out to me today was that sustainability, what makes a package sustainable, can't be reduced to a single number or material choice. Recycled content, I think, is great and is an incredibly important tool. But it's, only one piece of a much bigger system. The best decisions happen when we look at the entire package, from sourcing and manufacturing to performance and end of life.
Now, and I think this was a really good conversation. We've known Jay for a long time, and I think he really brings a good perspective. I loved how he talked a little bit about where customers are at in their journey. His comfortably numb, the people that really don't even know that regulations are occurring. And then, on the other end of the spectrum, those people who really are looking for the possibilities and how they can use sustainable packaging as a way to grow their company and really make it a competitive advantage. So I thought that was a really good way to look at it. And then I also would say maybe a reminder on how regulations don't have to be viewed as obstacles. They can really drive better design, better collaboration, and really find an opportunity for us to innovate.
Absolutely. I liked his innovation triangle too, trying to find that magical unicorn. We call it our holy grail that we've been chasing for years, of this, something that's the best at performance, the best at sustainability, and the best at cost, where you don't have to compromise across the board. We're still looking for it. If any of our listeners have found it, please let us know. I want to say thank you to Jay so much for joining us and sharing his perspective, a little bit of what they're working on over at IPG. If you've enjoyed today's conversation, please give us a follow, leave us a review, and share this episode with somebody who's working in packaging, sustainability, product development, regulations, so on.
And if you'd like more insights, case studies, educational resources on sustainable packaging, that's what we do. So check us out at the Sustainable Design Lab. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.